The camp was alive with noise and pride that morning. Soldiers in their heavy gear laughed and shouted as they marched across the field, their boots hitting the ground in a perfect rhythm. The air smelled of dust and metal, and sweat a sound of orders mixed with the echo of drums, and far away a voice shouted attention, and every soldier straightened like trees in the wind. Among them walked Maya. Her green medic uniform looked too plain, too light compared to the others. Her boots were clean, her face calm, her bag hung on her shoulder filled with bandages and bottles instead of bullets. She did not carry a gun, she carried hope, but no one saw it that way. As she walked by a group of young soldiers, laughed one of them, said, "Look who is here, the brave warrior of bandages." Another added, "Maybe she can fight the enemy with a thermometer." They all laughed again, and the sound of it followed her like smoke. Maya did not look back. She just smiled gently, her brown eyes soft but focused. She had heard those words too many times. Just a medic. They said just someone who carries supplies and helps a little when things go bad. But she knew something they did not know. She knew what real war looked like. She had seen it closer than any of them ever had. The camp commander was an old man with a deep scar on his cheek. He called her to his tent. "Maya, you will be stationed near the front line again," he said in his rough voice. "Are you ready?" She nodded without fear. "Yes, sir, I am ready." He studied her face for a moment, then sighed. "I wish they all had your calm," he said quietly before turning away. Outside, the sun burned bright, the wind carrots, and across the ground Maya walked toward the trucks, her heart steady. She did not hate the soldiers who laughed. She understood them. They were proud, they were strong, but they did not know yet that strength has many faces. On the truck, the ride was long, the road bumpy, the sound of engines mixed with laughter. The same young soldier sat across from her, the one who had made fun of her earlier. He smirked again. "Hey, medic," he said, "why don't you tell us what you do when someone gets shot? Do you cry with them?" The other soldiers laughed, but Maya looked straight at him and said softly, "I try to make sure they live long enough to laugh again." The laughter stopped for a moment. The soldier looked away, pretending not to hear her. The rest of the trip went silent. Only the rumble of the truck filled the air. When they reached the outpost, Maya stepped down, her eyes scanning the area. There were tents half buried in sand. The smell of smoke and oil drifted in the air. She saw stretchers lined up outside a tent, some clean, some stained dark with dry blood. Her hands tightened around her bag. She had been here before, and she knew what was waiting. As night fell, she sat alone near the fire, her hands busy cleaning her tools one by one. A small light flickered on her face, showing her quiet strength. In the distance, she could hear the soldiers talking, laughing, still teasing. She could hear her name among their words, but she stayed silent. Her thoughts went back to the last battle. She remembered the screams, the dust of red sky. She remembered kneeling beside a soldier who could no longer speak, holding his hand as she tried to stop the bleeding. She had whispered to him, "You will be okay, stay with me." He had smiled once, then gone quiet forever. She had wiped her tears and moved on to the next wounded, because that is what medics do. They move on no matter how much it hurts. Now, sitting by the fire, she whispered again to herself, "I am just a medic," but her voice carried a strange strength like a promise in the dark. Suddenly a shadow appeared behind her. It was the same young soldier. He looked unsure, scratching his neck. "Hey, medic," he said awkwardly. "Sorry for earlier. I guess I was just joking." Maya looked up and smiled gently. "It is okay," she said. "We all deal with fear in different ways." He frowned. "What do you mean, fear?" She said nothing, just smiled again and went back to her work, her fingers moving quickly, wiping and packing tools with care. When he walked away, he kept glancing back at her. Something in his chest felt heavy. He had never seen someone so calm, so sure in a place like this. The night deepened, the stars faded behind clouds, and Maya finally stood up, looking toward the dark hills. Far away, she could see faint flashes like small fires glowing in the distance. She knew what they meant. War was coming soon. And when it came, the laughter would stop, the fear would begin, and they would all come running for the one person they called just a medic. She took a deep breath, tied her hair back, and whispered softly into the wind, "Tomorrow. They will understand tomorrow. They will know what this uniform really means." The fire flickered, the shadows danced around to the sound of crickets filled the air, and for a moment everything was still. Then a faint boom echoed from far away, shaking the ground under her feet. She looked up, her eyes cold, but steady. Her hands moved to grab her medical bag, and without waiting she started walking toward the sound, her heart calm, her steps firm. In that moment, Maya did not look like someone ordinary. She looked like someone born for the storm, her simple uniform glowing in the firelight, carrying the weight of countless unseen stories, stories written not in medals or ranks, but in courage and quiet sacrifice that no one ever noticed until it was too late. The night air was heavy with silence, the kind that makes the heart beat louder than the world around it. Maya walked slowly across the camp, her boots pressing into the dirt, her hand resting on her medical bag. She could feel the tension rising like smoke from a hidden fire. The soldiers were quiet now, their laughter gone, replaced by small whispers and nervous glances toward the dark hills beyond the fences. Far away, the sky flashed again, a dull orange glow, followed by a deep rumble. The ground shook a little, then went still again. Someone shouted in the distance, but the words were lost in the wind. Maya stopped for a second, listening. She knew that sound. She had heard it before too many times. It was the voice of war coming closer. The young soldier from before ran past her, his face pale, his helmet loose. He looked at her and said, "It is starting, medic, you better stay inside." Maya looked at him with calm eyes and replied softly, "I do not hide when others bleed." He wanted to argue, but the sound of another explosion cut through the night, louder this time, closer this time, and the sky lit up like fire. The alarm rang through the camp sharp and loud. Soldiers scrambled, grabbing their weapons, shouting orders, running in every direction. The commander's voice echoed through the radio. "All units prepare for contact. Repeat, prepare for contact." Maya took a deep breath and moved toward the medical tent. The air was filled with dust and shouting, the smell of smoke already creeping in. Inside the tent, she lined up her supplies, bandages, needles, morphine, water. Every small thing mattered. She tied her sleeves up high and waited, her heart steady, her hands ready. She heard the first truck arrive, filled with injured men, some screaming, some silent. The sound of pain filled the tent like a storm. Maya moved fast, her hands steady, her voice calm. She pressed bandages against wounds. She tied tourniquets. She spoke to each soldier softly, "Stay with me. You are safe. Breathe. You are safe." The blood was everywhere. The floor turned red, the air heavy with the smell of metal and fear. Outside, the noise grew louder, gunfire echoing from the hills, explosions shaking the ground. The tent shook with each blast, but Maya did not stop. She crawled through the narrow space between stretchers and knees, soaked in mud, her eyes sharp like a flame in the dark. A soldier ran in, shouting, "We need help out there. We cannot move the wounded. They are pinned down." Maya looked at him, then at the injured men around her. She hesitated for a moment, then grabbed a bag and said, "Lead the way." The soldier stared at her, shocked. "You cannot go out there. It is open fire." She said quietly, "They will die if I do not go." They ran out together, bullets cutting the air. The world turned into sound and smoke. The sky flashed again and again, and the earth trembled. Maya ducked behind a broken wall, a bag pressed against her chest. She could see a group of men lying on the ground, far ahead, some moving, some not. She crawled forward inch by inch, the soldier behind her shouting, "Be careful." But she did not listen. Her focus was sharp as glass. She reached the first man, blood pooling under him. She ripped his shirt open and pressed the bandage down. He groaned in pain. She whispered, "It is okay, you will be fine, stay awake." She moved to the next and the next, her hands moving like the rhythm of survival. The bullets did not stop, but she did not pause. Either one soldier beside her stared in disbelief, his hands shaking. He said, "You are crazy. You should not be here." She looked at him and said softly, "Maybe, but I am needed here." He had no answer. After what felt like hours, they pulled the last injured man back to safety. Maya's uniform was torn, her hands stained red, but her eyes still calm as she worked one wound after another. When dawn began to break, the battle slowed. The gunfire faded into silence. Smoke covered the sky. The soldiers sat on the ground, tired, dirty, broken. But alive, Maya walked between them, checking pulses, giving water, whispering small words of comfort. The commander approached her, his face covered in dust and sweat. He said, "You were out there in open fire, someone told me." She nodded quietly. "I had to." He looked at her for a long time, then shook his head. "You are something else, medic." She smiled faintly and said, "I am just doing what I was trained to do." Nearby, the young soldier watched her. He remembered how he had laughed before. Now his throat felt tight, his hands still trembling from the night. He walked over and said, "Medic, I was wrong about you." She looked up, her face gentle but tired. "There is no wrong or right out here," she said. "Only people who live and people we try to keep alive." The morning sun rose weak and pale over the broken camp, the air filled with the smell of smoke and dust. Maya stood still for a moment, looking at the horizon, her uniform dirty, her hair loose strands sticking to her face. The world around her was quiet again, but in that quiet there was something new, a kind of respect floating in the air like a whisper carried by the wind. The soldiers who had once mocked her now watched her in silence, their eyes filled with something different, something they did not understand. Yet she was still just a medic to them, but her calm presence, her bravery, her hands that did not shake in the storm told another story, a story that none of them would ever forget. As the sun rose high, the commander ordered everyone to rest. Maya sat near the fire, cleaning her hands, her body aching, her eyes heavy. She heard birds in the distance, a sound that felt almost strange after so much noise. She closed her eyes for a moment, whispering softly under her breath, "Another day, another life saved." And somewhere deep in her heart, she knew this was only the beginning, because the war was far from over, and the next time the alarms rang again, they would not see her as just a medic anymore. The morning sun rose weakly over the broken land, its light crawling slowly across the camp, touching faces covered in dust and tiredness. Maya stood near the edge of the field, her uniform still stained with blood, her eyes heavy but focused. She could not rest yet. There were still wounded men waiting inside the tent, and time was slipping away like sand through her fingers. Inside the tent, the air was thick with the smell of medicine and sweat. The cries of pain filled the space like waves hitting the shore. Maya moved from one stretcher to another, her hands never stopping, her voice soft but firm. She spoke to each soldier with calm words, "Breathe easy, you are safe, keep your eyes open, you will see your home again." Her voice carried something deeper than hope, it carried strength. One young soldier lay pale and shaking, his chest rising unevenly. Maya knelt beside him, her hands pressing against his wound. He looked up weakly and said, "You are just a medic, right?" She smiled faintly. "Yes, I am just a medic." He tried to laugh, but it turned into a cough. She whispered quietly, "But sometimes a medic can fight death too." The hours passed slowly like a long storm that would not end. Maya's hands ached, her back burned, her hair stuck to her face with sweat, yet she kept moving. She did not stop. She could not stop. She had already lost too many, and each loss carved a small scar inside her heart, one that would never heal. Outside, thunder rolled in the distance, not from the sky, but from the mountains where the battle had started again. The sound of artillery echoed across the valley. The ground trembled a little. The wounded looked around in fear. Maya looked up and said quietly, "It is all right. You are safe here." The soldiers nodded, trying to believe her, even when the sound of war kept calling their names. The young soldier from before, the one who had once mocked her, now followed her everywhere, carrying supplies, fetching water, wiping sweat from her forehead. When she forgot to stop, he said, "Medic, you should rest, you will fall." She looked at him and smiled a tired smile. "I will rest when they do." Later that evening, a new truck arrived, carrying more wounded. Some were barely breathing. Maya ran forward, her hands already ready. She climbed into the truck and began checking each man one by one, her eyes sharp. As Knive, one soldier, groaned, his leg crushed by debris, she cut his pant leg open, her fingers quick, her movement steady. Even as others turned away from the sight, she whispered to him, "Do not sleep, stay with me, talk to me, tell me your name." He whispered faintly, "Arif." She said, "Good, Arif, I am Maya, and I will not let you go." He looked at her weakly and said, "Promise." She said, "Promise." She worked on him for what felt like forever. The blood would not stop. Her hands moved, faster, pressing, wrapping, tightening again. And again the young soldier handed her new bandages, without words and movements, like a quiet dance between desperation and duty. At last the bleeding slowed. She looked at Arif and said softly, "See, you made it." He smiled a little, then his eyes closed. She shook him lightly. "Arif, stay with me." She said again, louder, "Arif." The monitor beeped once and again, then flat. The tent went silent for a moment. The world seemed to freeze around her. Maya stared at him, her chest heavy, her breath shaking. She pressed her hands harder, trying to bring him back. "Come on, Arif, come on, breathe for me, please breathe." The young soldier touched her shoulder gently, but she pushed his hand away. She kept pressing, her tears falling onto his chest. She whispered, "You promised me, Arif, you promised me you would not go." And then suddenly his chest rose again, just a little. A faint sound escaped his lips. She gasped, her eyes wide. "Yes, that is it. Breathe again. That is it. You are here. You are alive." The monitor beeped weakly again. The tent came alive with voices again. The young soldier laughed in disbelief. "He is alive," he said. Maya nodded, her hands trembling, but her eyes bright with relief. She whispered, "I told you I would not let you go." When the night came again, the camp was quiet except for the sound of the wind moving through the torn flags. Maya sat outside the tent, her legs crossed, her hands still stained red. She looked up at the dark sky, her thoughts heavy. She could still hear the sounds of war in the distance, but here there was peace for a moment. The young soldier brought her water. He sat beside her and said, "How do you keep going after seeing all that?" She looked at him for a long time, then said, "When I stop helping them, I will start dying inside." He said softly, "You are not just a medic, Maya." She smiled faintly. "Maybe not, but it is enough." A faint laugh escaped her lips and faded into silence. Her eyes drifted toward the hills, glowing faintly under the moonlight. She knew more battles were coming, more blood, more tears, but she also knew something else, that even in the middle of all this darkness, there was light, not bright, not loud, but steady like a heartbeat, steady like her purpose. As she sat there listening to the soft cries of the wind, she thought of the faces she had saved and the ones she could not. She whispered a small prayer under her breath for them all, not for victory, not for glory, but for peace, just peace. Somewhere behind her, the commander stood watching her, his face unreadable. He turned to his men and said quietly, "Remember her. She is not just a medic, she is a reason we are still standing." And as those words spread quietly across the camp, so did a new kind of respect, a new kind of faith. The night grew darker, but Maya's light did not fade. She closed her eyes for a moment and whispered softly, "Tomorrow we fight again, tomorrow we save again, and tomorrow the world will know that even between life and death a medic can stand unbroken." The sun had barely risen when the sky turned red again, its light mixed with smoke and fear. The air was hot and dry, carrying the sound of distant explosions across the valley. Maya stood near the tent, her bag already on her shoulder, her eyes scanning the horizon. She could feel something different in the air, something heavier, something waiting to happen. The commander shouted orders, his voice rough and loud. "All units prepare, the enemy is moving fast." Maya felt her heart tighten. She had been through many battles, but today felt different. The silence before the storm was colder. The ground seemed to tremble under her feet. The young soldier ran up to her, his face pale. They said, "We might be surrounded." He said, "What do we do?" Maya looked at him calmly. "We do what we always do. We keep them alive." He stared at her in disbelief. "How can you be so calm?" She smiled faintly. "Because panic never saved anyone." The first explosion hit nearby. The camp shook like an earthquake. Dust and fire filled the air. Men shouted orders, some running, others firing back. The sky darkened with smoke. Maya covered her face for a moment, then grabbed her bag and ran toward the sound of screams, her boots sliding through the dirt, her breath steady. She reached a small trench where 3 soldiers lay, one crying, one silent, one bleeding badly. She dropped to her knees, her hands moving fast, wrapping bandages, pressing against the wound. "Stay with me," she said over and over. "You will be fine, just breathe." The soldier tried to speak, but only managed to whisper, "Medic, please tell my mother." She said softly, "You can tell her yourself when you go home. Now stop talking and fight for your breath." A shell exploded close by throwing dust into the air. Her ears rang, her vision blurred. For a second she blinked hard, forcing herself to focus again. Another soldier shouted, "Medic, we need you there." She turned quickly and saw smoke rising from the command post. Her heart stopped for a moment, then she ran faster than she ever had. The command tent was burning. The commander lay on the ground, his uniform torn, his chest barely moving. Maya slid beside him, her hands shaking not from fear but from the weight of what she saw. She pressed her ear to his chest. No heartbeat. She began compressions, her voice steady. "Come on, so you are not leaving today, come on." Around her, soldiers shouted incoming again and again, but she did not stop. She kept pressing, counting in her mind, her lips whispering small words of hope. 1, 2, 3, breathe. Come back. 1, 2, 3, breathe. Again she leaned close and whispered, "You are stronger than this. You cannot give up on them. They need you." Seconds felt like hours, and the commander coughed once, gasping for air. She lifted his head slightly, tears in her eyes. "You are okay, so you are okay." He tried to speak, but only managed to nod weakly, his hand grabbing her wrist, his eyes filled with gratitude. The young soldier arrived breathless. He stared at the scene in disbelief. "He is alive," he whispered. Maya looked up, her face streaked with dirt and sweat, and said quietly, "Not yet, but he will be." She turned to him and said, "Get me more bandages now." He ran without a word. More explosions followed, shaking the ground again. The soldiers around them tried to fight back, their faces filled with fear, but when they saw Maya kneeling in the open fire, saving their commander, something changed in their eyes. Courage returned like a spark in the dark. They shouted louder, fought harder, pushed forward again. The battle raged for hours, the sky dark with smoke, the earth trembling under endless fire. Maya stayed with the wounded, her uniform soaked in blood, her hands moving like machines, her mind refusing to stop. Even when her arms ached, even when her body screamed for rest, she whispered to herself, "Not yet, not now, they need me." At one point a soldier fell beside her, his arm bleeding badly. She tore a piece of his sleeve and wrapped it tight, pressing hard. He groaned and said, "You are bleeding too, medic." She looked down and saw a small cut on her leg, the blood running slowly. She smiled faintly. "I have no time for that now." When the sun finally broke through the smoke, the battlefield was quiet again. The noise faded into the sound of the wind moving through broken tents. The ground was covered with dust and ash, but the camp still stood, and so did Maya. She sat beside the commander, who was breathing softly now, his eyes half open. He whispered, "You saved me." She shook her head softly. "No, so you saved yourself. I only reminded you how." The young soldier came and sat near her, his voice soft and tired. "I think everyone here owes you their life." She looked at him, her eyes gentle. "Not everyone, but as long as one person makes it home, that is enough." He said, "You are not just a medic, you are our heart." She looked away, smiling faintly. "Maybe, but hearts break too." As the sun sank behind the hills, the camp lights flickered on the soldiers gathered around the fire, their faces tired but full of new respect. Maya sat quietly at the edge, cleaning her tools, her fingers moving slowly, her eyes staring into the flames. She thought of all she had seen, all she had done, and she whispered softly into the fire, "Tomorrow will come, and so will the pain, but I will be ready again." The commander stood with Kane leaning heavily. He looked at his men, then at Maya, and said in a firm voice, "Today we survived because of her. She may wear the uniform of a medic, but she carries the soul of a warrior." The soldiers cheered softly, not loud, not wild, but deep from their hearts. The night wrapped around them gently, carrying the echoes of courage and fear mixed together. Maya looked up at the stars, her heart heavy yet peaceful. She whispered once more to the wind, as if speaking to all those who could not hear her anymore, "I am just a medic, but even just a medic can stand against death and not turn away." The night after the battle was heavy and quiet, the kind of quiet that makes every heartbeat sound louder. Maya sat alone by the dying fire, her uniform stiff with dried blood, her hands trembling softly as she cleaned her tools one by one. The flame flickered weakly, painting her tired face with orange light, her eyes dark and distant, filled with memories she wished she could forget. Around her the camp was silent. Soldiers slept wherever they could, some still whispering prayers, others too tired to move. The air smelled of smoke, and out the stars hid behind thick clouds, as if even the sky did not want to look at what had happened. The commander rested inside the tent, breathing slow, his voice weak but alive. The young soldier guarded outside, still awake, his eyes following Maya's every movement. She looked fragile, yet strong, broken, yet standing. Her body swayed slightly with exhaustion, but her spirit did not bend. She thought of the men she had lost that day, their faces flashing in her mind like fading lanterns. One had asked her to tell his mother he was brave, and another had whispered his sister's name. Before his voice disappeared forever, she pressed her hand over her chest, feeling the weight of every promise. She could not keep her heart heavy with unspoken goodbyes. The young soldier walked toward her quietly, carrying 2 metal cups of tea. He handed one to her, saying softly, "You should drink something." She looked up with tired eyes. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice rough from dust and crying. He sat beside her, both staring into the fire for a long time, neither speaking. The silence between them said everything. After a while, he asked, "Do you ever get used to it?" She tilted her head. "What do you mean?" He said, "The pain, the loss, the fear." She shook her head slowly. "No, you never get used to it. You just learn to keep walking even when it hurts." She sipped her tea and added softly, "That is the price of duty." A cold wind passed through the camp, carrying faint echoes of faraway gunfire. Maya looked up at the sky and said quietly, "Tomorrow will come and we will fight again." The young soldier frowned. "How do you keep faith after everything?" She smiled faintly. "Faith is not about believing it will be easy. It is about believing it will be worth it." As dawn crept over the horizon, painting the world in shades of pale gold, the soldiers began to stir, the air filled again with the rustle of movement. The commander called for a meeting, his voice still weak, but steady. Maya stood among them, her back straight, her hands clasped behind. The commander spoke slowly. We have lost much, but we stand because of her. He pointed toward Maya. She looked away shyly, not seeking attention, but the soldiers cheered anyway, their voices rising through the morning light. After the meeting, she returned to her tent to pack supplies for another rescue trip. But as she bent down, a sharp pain shot through her leg. She looked down and saw the wound from the battle, now red and swollen. She pressed her hand over it, breathing slowly, ignoring the pain. She had no time to rest. She told herself pain could wait, lives could not. The young soldier noticed her limp and rushed over. Medic, you are hurt, he said. She shook her head. It is nothing, just a scratch. He frowned. That scratch could kill you. She smiled faintly. Not before I finish my work, he sighed in frustration. But he knew she would not stop. They moved together to the vehicles, loading boxes of medicine and water. The air was hot again, filled with dust rising from the ground. Maya wiped her forehead and tied her hair tight to her face, pale, but determined. The commander called after her, take care out there. She nodded, I always do. The road was long and rough, the truck bouncing over every rock. Maya sat quietly in the back, staring at the horizon, her thoughts drifting back to her family. She had not seen them in months. She wondered if they knew she was still alive. She wondered if they would be proud or afraid of what she had become, a medic who had seen more of death than life. When they reached the small village near the border, the destruction was worse than she imagined. Houses turned to ashes, a smell of smoke and fear in the air, children crying in corners, women searching for loved ones. Maya jumped down from the truck and started working immediately, setting up a small area for the wounded, her hands moving fast, her heart breaking at every sight. A small boy about 10 years old clung to her arm, his face covered in dust, his eyes wide with fear. Please help my mother, he cried. Maya followed him into a collapsed house. Inside, a woman lay pinned under wooden beams. Maya dropped to her knees, trying to lift the debris, her muscles shaking with effort. The young soldier rushed in to help. Together they freed the woman, barely alive. Maya pressed her ear to her chest and whispered, stay with me, please stay. The woman opened her eyes weakly and smiled thank you before slipping into unconsciousness. Maya worked quickly, her hands trembling but steady, wrapping wounds, giving medicine, whispering softly to the boy, she will be okay, she will live, I promise. Hours later, when the village was finally quiet and the wounded safe, Maya sat on a broken wall, the boy asleep beside her. The young soldier looked at her and said, you saved so many today. Again she shook her head softly. No, I just helped him see another sunrise. He smiled faintly. That is more than most can do. The sky turned pink as evening fell. Maya looked at the fading light, her body aching, her wound bleeding again, but she felt no fear, only peace. She whispered to herself softly, the price of duty is pain, but if that pain saves one life, it is worth everything. As the stars appeared one by one above the quiet land, Maya closed her eyes for a moment, her heart tied, but proud. She had given all she could, and she knew she would do it again, because that was who she was, not just a medic, but a soul built from courage and compassion. The morning was soft and quiet, the kind of morning that makes the world seem peaceful again. Birds sang weakly in the distance, and the wind carried the smell of rain across the valley. Maya sat under a broken wall, her eyes half open, her hands resting on her knees. Her body, so from endless days of saving lives, the boy she had rescued still slept beside her, his head resting against her arm, his breathing slow and calm. The sun climbed higher, painting the sky in gold and pink. The camp was silent except for the faint rustle of leaves and the distant hum of trucks moving supplies. A young soldier walked toward her, carrying a flask of water, his uniform torn and dusty, his eyes tired but warm. He knelt beside her and said quietly, you did not sleep again. She smiled weakly. Sleep feels far away. He handed her the water drink. He said, you need it. She nodded and took a small sip. The cold water felt like life. A messenger arrived, breathless, his voice breaking. Commander wants everyone back at base immediately. It is urgent. Maya looked at the boys still sleeping. Tell them I will come soon. The young soldier said, I will take him. You go ahead. Maya hesitated, then nodded. Thank you, she said softly. The road back to camp was long, the sky turning gray with heavy clouds. Thunder murmured far away as if warning of something unseen. Maya walked beside the truck, her limp worse, but she ignored it, her bag still slung over her shoulder, heavy with bandages and medicine, her eyes fixed ahead. When she reached the base, the scene was tense. Soldiers moved quickly, voices shouting orders, radios buzzing. The commander stood near the main tent, leaning on his cane, his face serious. Maya hurried to him. What happened? So she asked. He looked at her and said quietly, there was an ambush at the northern border. We lost contact with half the team. They are sending rescue units now, but I need you to go too. Her heart tightened. Immediately she nodded without question. The rain began to fall, soft at first and heavy, soaking everything. In seconds the ground turned to mud, the sky dark. As night trucks rumbled through the gates carrying soldiers' weapons and supplies, Maya climbed into the back, her hair dripping, her fingers gripping her bag tighter. The ride was rough, the rain hitting her face like cold glass. Lightning flashed across the sky, revealing the mountains ahead black and broken. The sound of thunder mixed with a distant echo of explosions. Maya's chest tightened again, but her eyes stayed calm. The young soldier sat beside her silent, both knowing what awaited them at the end of the road. When they arrived, the sight froze them in place. The area was destroyed, vehicles burned, the smell of smoke and metal filled the air. Maya jumped down, running toward the wounded, her boots sinking into the mud, her uniform soaked. She dropped beside the first soldier and began to work, her hands moving quickly, wrapping wounds, giving injections, shouting for water. She could barely hear her own voice over the storm. The young soldier ran back and forth, bringing supplies, covering the wounded with blankets, his eyes wide with fear, yet he never stopped. Maya shouted over the noise, "Get me more bandages now, hurry." He nodded and ran. Lightning split the sky again, lighting her face fierce and focused, her eyes glowing with determination as she fought for every breath, every heartbeat around her. A blast echoed from the hill, throwing debris through the air. Maya fell to the ground, mud splashing across her face, her ears ringing. For a moment she could not move. Then she saw the young soldier lying there by his arm, bleeding. She crawled to him through the rain, her heart pounding. "Stay with me," she said, pressing on his wound. He groaned. "Medic, it is bad." She shook her head. "No, you are fine. You hear me. You are fine." She tore a strip from her uniform and tied it tight around his arm. He looked at her through the rain and said, "You never stop, do you?" She smiled faintly. "Not until they all go home." He tried to laugh, but pain stopped him. She whispered softly, "You will be okay, I promise." Hours passed before the gunfire faded, before the rescue team finally arrived. The storm slowly calmed the sky, opening just enough for light to slip through. Maya stood covered in mud and blood, her uniform torn, her face streaked with rain, and dirt around her lay the soldiers she had saved, breathing alive, safe. The commander arrived, limping, his voice filled with emotion. "Maya, you did it again." She looked at him, shaking her head quietly. "We all did, sir." The next morning the camp gathered under the pale sun. The rain had stopped, the air smelled clean, and the commander stood before his men holding a small box, his voice steady today. "We honor those who stood between life and death." He turned to Maya, stepped forward. She hesitated, then walked slowly, her limbs still there, her eyes lowered. He opened the box and pinned the metal to her chest, his voice soft but strong. "This uniform of yours tells a story that words never could. It tells of courage, of sacrifice, of love for life itself." The soldiers cheered, not loud, but with feeling deep and real, their faces filled with respect. The young soldier clapped his good hand, smiling through tears. Maya looked down at her uniform, dirty, torn, stained with blood and rain, but shining under the new sun. She touched the metal gently and whispered to herself, "I am just a medic, but this uniform carries every life. I have touched every soul I have saved." As the crowd began to leave, she stood still for a moment, looking at the horizon. The world quiet again. The boy from the village ran toward her, holding a small wildflower. He smiled shyly and said, "My mother is better, thank you." She took the flower in her hand, smiling warmly. "That is all I ever wanted." The wind moved softly through the camp, lifting the edges of her coat, her hair dancing in the light, her eyes calm as the morning sky. She turned to walk away, her bag on her shoulder, her steps slow, but steady behind her. The soldiers watched in silence, and for the first time they did not see a simple medic. They saw something far greater, a healer, a fighter, a heart that refused to break. And as she disappeared down the dusty road, her uniform glowing faintly in the sun, every soldier knew deep inside that her story would never be forgotten, because it was written not in ink or metal, but in the lives she saved and the courage she left behind.